Hello and welcome from Buenos Aires, Argentina, to this episode of Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where Nate has conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a focus on those that have some connection to Latin America. My name is Josefina Dominguez, and I am an editor for LatinList, a proud sponsor of the Crossing Borders podcast. Sign up for our weekly updates on latinlist.com to get a summary of the week's biggest headlines in Latin American tech news. Nate's guest today is Alejandro Freund, country manager for Rappi in Ecuador. But before that, Alejandro was co-founder and CEO of YaEsta, at the time a leading e-commerce company in the country. They talk about the process of winding down YaEsta and what they could have done differently, and Alejandro also gives advice to other founders on managing personal relationships as an entrepreneur, knowing how far to push a startup, and also talks about the hardships and sacrifices that come with the job. We hope you enjoy this conversation with Alejandro Freund.
Hey Alejandro, welcome to the podcast. Welcome back. Thanks for being here.
Hey Nathan, thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure being here.
Where are you in the world today?
I'm still in Quito, Ecuador.
So a lot of things have changed since we first did your episode in the podcast almost a little over 3 years ago in 2017. What are you doing today?
It's been over 3 years since we spoke podcast. I've been working for Rappi for over a year now. I was hired at the end of June of last year to start to build Rappi here in Ecuador. So that's what I've been up to.
And one of the reasons that Rappi probably was interested is that you had a background in e-commerce with your business YaEsta, which if people want to hear more about the backstory of how that business started and why, you can listen to episode 11 on the podcast. It's called Pioneering E-commerce in Latin America and Ecuador. So we'll put that in the show notes. We're going to pick up where, and you may want to listen to that episode before going into this, because we're going to pick up right where that podcast left off. So set the scene for where you were in 2017, right? Kind of where we were doing the podcast.
All right. So we were thriving. We were building the leading e-commerce company in Ecuador. We had a fierce competition from Linio, but we were able to hold them off. We were raising our third round of funding at that point. This was summer 2017, right? So we were raising money, our third round of funding. We had raised a bunch of money in Ecuador, and at that point it was clear that the only way to take it to the next level. So we were aiming to raise up to $3 million in that third round. And it was going to be very, very hard to raise that amount of money locally. So I started going to LAFCA events and visiting all the VCs in Latin America, in Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Chile. And we found a big roadblock. So our thesis right off the bat with YaEsta.com was Ecuador is a very closed market. You don't have strong competitors in the retail market locally, nor in the digital space, at least at that point. So our thesis going into this and what we stuck with was we had to build, instead of expanding regionally, we had to focus on dominating Ecuador and leading the market and generating a situation where we were the leading marketplace e-commerce player, and we would have sort of a bidding war between the retailers, between the incumbents, to actually get to our position. And the other premise was that all the retailers in Ecuador, or most of them, vast majority, were very, very far behind their peers in other countries like Colombia, Peru, or Chile. They had not invested aggressively in their digital development. So our play was to build out these capabilities and then go into an M&A process and generate a sort of bidding war between the retailers, the local retailers, or retailers that had intention of coming into Ecuador or that participate in the Ecuadorian market. And that was our play, but it didn't work out as we planned.
So flash forward to two years after the podcast, a year ago from today, more or less. How did it end up?
Yeah, so we're raising the third round, and every investor we spoke to in LATAM, they're like, yeah, we really like what you're doing. We really like the team you built. The traction was not great, but it was decent. We were growing, like tripling our numbers every year. So, it was all right. It was not as fast as other countries. Ecuador is a dollarized economy. There were no, the competitive landscape looked good for us. So everything was good, except that there were two things. One, the VCs are looking for regional plays because a country like Ecuador with 18 million people is too small to generate important or relevant returns to the risk. And the play of focusing just here was limited. I mean, they didn't see and that Ecuador didn't really have many exit or M&A track record. So basically that was why we got shut down by many of the prospect VCs. They were like, I love everything except these two things. So we weren't able to raise the third round. We only raised about a bit over $1 million in the third round of funding. That had taken us to a total of over 2.5, and it was just not enough money for the whole infrastructure we had built. We had a 25-person team, and the marketing play was very aggressive in order to keep growing at that rate. Margins were definitely not good enough. The recurrence we had chosen to focus on technology, consumer electronics, appliances, furniture, and the recurrence in that market is very low. So our top of mind and the frequency of the client was low. The customer acquisition cost was very high, and the lifetime value was low. So that situation took us to a cash bleeding business with not a clear path to profitability. Our unit economics were starting to get quite decent, but the outlook in the long term in the midterm did not look extremely attractive. So we had a very difficult board meeting in September, October of March of 2018. And we realized that we had to find an alternative, either joint venture or start a formal M&A process. So coincidentally, in April or May of 2018, we had a big retailing group from Central America visit us, visit our headquarters. One of our board members was with us to receive these visitors, and they said basically, yeah, I love what you've built. This is what we need. And what's your price? And I guess we got a bit cocky because we saw that our play was playing out as we planned, and that we were attracting attention from retailing groups, and that we would be able to generate a sort of bidding war for YaEsta.com. So we told them, instead of saying, this is our price and just say, let's move forward, we said, well, there's other players that are interested, and we're going to start a formal M&A process, and you'll be contacted by our bankers and this and that. And these guys obviously didn't like that because they were apparently ready to move forward. And so we interviewed 5 investment banks from Ecuador and Colombia, and we picked one. and we started sending out the teaser in July. We had 9 groups sign. This group also signed the letter of interest and the NDA, but they were disenchanted with the whole process. They saw us, I guess, trying to jack up the price, and they were, I guess, not happy with that. So it took us. We started that process, July 2018, and then we got all these letters of interest by September, October, and then the problem was that retail season, Black Friday and Christmas and all that is very hectic for retailers. So their attention shift towards that. For the M&A process, given that we had raised only a bit over $1 million, we were very, very tight on cash. So our board and closed group of investors, we had like 45 investors at that point. So the, I guess, tight-knit group, the close, advisors and board members and early investors, they put about like $350K convertible note to try to get us to the other side, keep us alive until we would hopefully successfully sell the company. And by December, it seemed like we were almost ready to close a deal with another group, also sort of, foreign group, and that deal fell through. And we had like 1 month of cash. We were completely over leveraged. We just started working with our supplier, with supplier credit. So we had very, very big liabilities with our suppliers and some other creditors, like, I guess, accountants, lawyers, rent, whatever. And it was we were in a very tight spot because we didn't have a clear path. We had one written offer, which was very, very low, but it was still a written offer by another group. And we had a verbal offer by a different group, actually a retailing group, who was one of our investors. And January started. We had a emergency board meeting on, I guess, January 1st or 2nd. And they were like, all right, this is really not working. The M&A process is really slow. And the problem is that with startups, with the vast majority of startups, the value created is not reflected in the short term or midterm in the P&L or in the balance sheet. Many of the intangible assets that you've built, like customer base or supplier network, supplier relationships, trade marketing agreements, all of that is not really materialized in the balance sheet or in the P&L. So when you get M&A guys, bankers, investment bankers talking to these groups, what happens is that a formal or traditional M&A boutique firm, they start talking, so they reach out to the decision maker, and the decision maker is like, perfect, talk to my CFO. And once this discussion lands in the CFO, these deals really never make sense on paper. It requires the vision of the head of innovation or the head or the CEO of the company or the president of the board understanding the implications of not investing in the digital world. So it was a very complicated conversation between bankers and CFOs, and it never got anywhere. And basically, that board meeting that we had on January 2nd, we decided that I was going to go personally and visit all the different retailers, all the groups that were interested at one point, and just pitch to them and tell them, look, guys, this is, we have this offer. It's a bad offer, but it's an offer. Can you do anything better? Anything of what we built is useful? Is any of the things that we built, are they useful for you? How do you see this play? And just turn the question around instead of trying to pitch. Have the buyers, the prospect buyers, pitch to us, telling us what is useful from what we built. And most of them would agree that what we built is very useful and very valuable for them. But I guess Ecuador's economy has been stagnant for 5 years or in recession. I mean, it's a very complicated market. People are not bringing money from abroad. So the groups are very, very cautious with their money and with their investments. So we basically had like 25 days of cash and one offer on the table, one verbal, one written, one verbal, and we were running out of cash. And then, I don't know if you have any questions about that process. We had spoken at that point, I remember, but we basically had a meeting with our lawyers at the end of January, and they said, look, guys, what you need to do right now is just preserve any cash you have for any liabilities with employees or taxes or whatever. And we just have to cut our losses and fire everybody and just call it a day. So we were basically getting to that point, and surprisingly, so we had to raise some more money. We sent out a letter to all our investors. It was a very, very difficult letter to send out to many people who really don't understand startup investing. They've invested more in traditional businesses. And basically it was a letter saying, look, guys, we ran out of money. The process was going well. The process went south. And this is the situation. We have a verbal offer, which is bad or not that bad, and a written offer, which is bad, but it'll get you cents on the dollar or decent cents on the dollar. But still, we need some time for the due diligence process and to get this across the table. Or B, we still need to raise some money in order to clean out some of the liabilities that might have repercussion on us as investors. In Ecuador, the concept of limited liability is very, very grayish. So we had to send out a letter saying basically, hey guys, we need another 300K to keep us afloat for 3 more months and to give us a chance of closing a deal with these groups, or in case that any of the deals fall through, give us a chance to sort of clean the house and leave us at that situation. So it was, and basically you don't have to invest, you're not forced to invest, but basically if you don't invest, you're gonna be heavily diluted. So in essence, we did a convertible note, but embedded a very low valuation. So it was sort of a down round, a very aggressive down round, to incentivize people from putting their pro rata investment. So that's where we were at, Nate. It was a very, very difficult situation.
And in the end, you ended up getting that deal done to basically save most of the employees' jobs, right? And find a home for the business.
Well, actually, no. Yes, but no. So we sent out that email. We raised a vast majority of investors put their money. We raised 70% of the money. And both of the deals fell through. It was devastating. And I remember it was Super Bowl Sunday. So it was that weekend where we got the news that both deals fell through, and no other deals were coming along. So we had that meeting with the lawyer saying, all right, we have to shut down the company on Monday. Literally, we have to cut our losses, fire everybody. And I went to a friend's house to watch the Super Bowl. I was super depressed. I got separated from my wife at that point. I was just too much. Everything was just so complex, so blurry, so really in a dark place. And my buddy invited me over to watch the Super Bowl. He had a Super Bowl party. And I was like, fuck it. I'll just go have a beer and watch the game. There's pretty much nothing else I can do. And I was talking to the host, and he's like, why the long face? Everything seemed like going in order for you guys. You guys were about to, sell the company. And I was like, well, everything went down the drain, and we're literally going to have to fire everybody tomorrow. And he said, well, what happened? So I told him, a summary of everything. And he's like, so what would it imply for our group to buy your company? And I was like, whoa, let me think about it. So we have this amount in liabilities, and this is what it currently costs us to operate the company. This is what we're burning per year. But I guess if we reduce the headcount and we reduce the marketing spend, and we can generate synergies with your accounting and with your legal and with your logistics. So these guys were a local logistics company and technology, actually. They had invested in an e-commerce company, e-commerce platform creator, like a year before or 2 years before. Actually, I had introduced them. And they were really moving on the digital path. So I told them, I guess it would cost you this amount to operate the company if you become really efficient. So he said, look, coincidentally, we're about to close a deal for a similar amount, and that deal didn't go through. So we liberated some cash. I was like, dude, if you're serious, like, please let me know, because I'm literally about to fire everybody tomorrow morning. And he said, all right, don't do anything crazy. Just hold on for a couple of days. I said, I literally don't have a couple of days. So he called me like, I don't know, I was jogging 7 a.m. And he's like, look, so I spoke to my partners. So basically his dad and his brother. And I can't give you a yes answer. We would need to do some sort of due diligence, but give me until Thursday and I'll get back to you. I said, man, I'm literally, now I'm playing in no man's land, because I'm not using the money from investors to shut down the company in a sort of orderly fashion. And I'm burning more of their money, which was promised for two specific purposes: either shut down the company or give ourselves the chances of closing a deal. But those two seem out of a question. So I really need an answer fast. So I called the board and I told them, guys, please give me 3 days. I might be cooking a deal. And they said, I mean, all right, we'll give you, you have until Friday. And it moved along very swiftly. We actually moved our operations to their offices in a matter of a week and a half. We closed the deal. They assumed all the liabilities. They assumed all the costs, additional, operating costs. Sadly, we weren't able to get money back for the investors or keep an equity stake in the deal. We were obviously negotiating with absolutely no bargaining power. So we signed on February 7th, I guess, an initial contract, and we moved our operations immediately. And we had all the employees start, updating their LinkedIn profiles, and we had started recommending people to other companies, because in Ecuador you can't just fire and lay off people. The severance cost is very, very high. On average, it's at least 3 months of salary plus vacations and everything, and sick days and this and that. So just laying everybody off was very expensive. But if they resigned or they quit and they found a better alternative, then the severance is very limited. So we incentivized people to find other alternatives. Many people found good alternatives, and we reduced our liabilities through that. And then we moved the company. And Martin and I, my co-founder, were there until May 7th, and we did a handover of the company, and that was that.
It was an incredible, just pressurized story to get something done and get the employees into a good spot, and winding down a company with all of the extra challenges of being in Latin America, where, like you said, you can't just fire people. I'm not sure how it works in Ecuador, but in some countries like Brazil, those social payments sometimes could be personal responsibility of the owners of the company.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. They not could be. They are. So those liabilities extended all the way to all the cap table.
Yeah, it's a huge. In Brazil, there's been structures so that it doesn't extend all the way to the cap table that they figured out, but it's really it can be complicated shutting down companies.
Very complicated.
Yeah, and there are structures to fix that in by having kind of offshore holding companies or
we did. We were sort of protected. We did
Yeah.
have the company was set up in the States and the Ecuadorian was only a subsidiary, so the cap table was all in the U.S. company. It was a wholly owned subsidiary. It was sort of protected, but still, I don't know. We don't need to go into that detail, but just let's leave it at it's very complex to close down companies with outstanding liabilities in Latin America.
Yeah, and so going back to like that whole process, looking back today, when did you first know or start feeling like, hey, maybe this could not be what I want it to be? Because when you start a company, everything is optimism. I'm going to take over the market. I'm going to make a bunch of money. I'm going to solve this big problem. When was the first inkling that, like, hey, maybe this isn't going to work?
I mean, I still, and the board actually, we still stand by our thesis. We still stand by our play. We've reflected upon this many times with our board members and close advisors who are also investors. Like, all right, where did we go wrong, or what should we have done differently? And obviously, hindsight bias is easy, but even with hindsight bias, but given the information that we had at those certain points, there are few things we would have done differently. Not too many, to be frank. I mean, obviously not burn so much money, but then you had the trade-off of growing even slower. Maybe the play should have been regional, 2 or 3 countries, or the small countries like Bolivia, Paraguay. I don't know. Maybe we could have, but the coulda, woulda, shoulda. But given the information, as you say, that we had, I mean, startups are in many cases just so empirically, the biggest factor for success for a startup, more than the team, the funding, or the idea, is the timing. And research shows that. And I guess, I don't know, maybe we were a bit off in the timing. We thought that Ecuador was ready for digital businesses, and it wasn't. Now, obviously, everything has changed. We would have been able to keep the company afloat for up to now. The story would be different, and then everybody would have said, your play was fantastic. But it wasn't, I guess, in great proportion because of timing and cash flow. Cash flow is something that, many companies, many of the most successful companies have been in the brink of bankruptcy because of cash flow. And that doesn't mean they weren't on a path to reach profitability or solid contribution margin or anything else. It was just a cash flow constraints. Many of the big companies that we know today were at some point in a very tight spot in terms of cash flow. So I'm not sure. Many of the things we've done differently. Maybe start planning the exit process more in advance. Start working with the retailers hand in hand. Definitely not use a formal traditional investment bank for an M&A process. The only person who can sell the intangible assets that have been built are the founders or the board, I guess. But you can only use a M&A boutique to give the process more formality, or to make some intros that maybe you're not, you cannot get to, or going again with the formality, give the process some validity, saying, this investment banking is taking risk with some sort of risk with taking on this client. So it's not only two kids playing startup world, but it's actually, a formal process. And that's what it should have been. But though I guess we over delegated the process to the bankers, and that was just not the way to sell this company that we had created, which was the leading e-commerce player here.
So you're doing a public service here by sharing this story to many founders who are going to be listening to this, are in a similar situation. We're in tough times, coronavirus, many times in startups that fail. It's not really the founder's fault. You mentioned timing, market conditions, pandemics. Really, anything can happen. You have to kind of thread the needle, doing everything right, plus having a whole bunch of luck and time on your side. So you mentioned it was you were in a tough place and you had separated from your wife. What was that like, and what advice would you give to founders who are going through tough times?
So don't get me wrong. We did a lot of mistakes. I'm not saying we're immune to any to mistakes. I mean, we had a lot of errors, starting with me. There's a wide. I've actually written them down. I'm sort of writing recollections from a collection of errors and things I would have done differently. Many things, hiring process, execution. Categories. There's just a bunch of things that we could have done differently. I was talking more in a general sense of the vision of the idea and that. So going back to your question, what advice? I mean, it's really tough. I mean, even if you have a very supportive couple partner, it's just not the same when the other person's not an entrepreneur and doesn't understand it from within and just sees you in a very frustrated position and trying to help, but not really having the tools to properly be there for your entrepreneur partner. So what tips can I give you? I mean, starting a company is a commitment for the whole family, and you have to be very, very transparent with your family and your couple that the risk is very, very high. 9 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 startups fail, 2 just sort of make it, and 1 is actually a success. So you have to be very transparent about the dreams that you have and what you're building, and that it just takes a toll on every single aspect of your life, and they have to buy in into that vision. And not only when things are going north, going well, but things will turn sour. You will have very difficult situations. I had so I was also, I guess, a bit naive. So my pitch with my wife, and especially I guess my wife, was, everything's super tough, but as long as we just get the first round of funding, everything will change. We'll have money, we'll grow, we'll do this and that. And then you just raise your first round, and 3 months later, you're like, shit, I have to start planning my next round, because raising money, especially in Latin America, takes 6 to 9 months. So if this first round is going to last 12 months, it's been 3 months, I have to start planning my next round. And then the stress comes again, and then you're like, fuck, how am I going to pay suppliers? How am I going to pay employees? Am I going to be able to pay my own salary? Am I going to keep getting in debt, personal debt? So I came out of YaEsta with a huge personal debt, because the salary didn't compensate my expenses. And given that you have so many sacrifices as an entrepreneur and for the family, I didn't want to put additional pressure by just being very tight on cash in every aspect. So I always had an optimistic view that it's fine to just use up my credit cards, because eventually in my exit, it will be peanuts and I'll be able to just clean that up in one swoop. So it's really hard. I mean, you have to understand, your couple has to understand that things you'll be in a very tight position, and you'll have, it's a roller coaster. It's a camel that will have extreme highs and extreme lows, and maybe many times you're grumpy and you're stressed, and sometimes you just raise money and you're just seeing the next problem and the next problem, and until you get to a point of either profitability or IPO or whatever, it will be a very unstable emotional situation.
Thanks for sharing that. It's really helpful, I think, to other entrepreneurs in the region, because it is one of the biggest things that I see is that when we all know on the investor side that, like you said, 7 of 10 probably aren't going to do well. And so that's going to be more than the majority, right? And it's normal. And in the US, kind of shutting down a business and going on to your next thing is normal. It's what people do. It's expected. It's even like considered a plus, but in LATAM circles, sometimes it's not. And the kind of zombie companies that can stay from there rather than looking for the exit and, getting new experience as now country manager in Rappi, that's how it should work, right? It should work like this, where you land on your feet with a good job and new experience and get ready to do whatever you're going to do next. So thinking through like other founders that maybe are just like, they've got a business, it's working, but it's never going to be big. And maybe they would like to do something else, but just are not pulling the trigger because of either pressure on themselves, pressure from family, pressure from friends. You've been through it now and you came out the other side, landed on your feet with something, a really good spot. Talk to those founders about like, is it okay to sell the business or shut it down, even if, you're going to get from pressure from yourself or from the outside world?
Completely. I mean, look, there's a very good podcast from, I think her name is Stephanie Cohen. She was a professional soccer player from Venezuela who lives in the States. And I think the podcast is called Knowing When to Quit, or When Quitting is Right, or something like that. And you have to know when to quit. And quitting is not maybe quitting. Quitting is just moving on to a different phase of your life. Quitting is a very harsh word. It has a very negative connotation. But if you understand how to work with it, you can make peace with yourself. So if you have a company, it depends if it's a lifestyle business and it's profitable. I mean, or if it's a hyper growth startup, and you have to understand the differences. So the pressure in a very highly scalable business that requires external funding is not comparable to a traditional business. So let's focus more on the latter. And if you're in this sort of situation where you've raised money from outside, you have very enormous pressure from your family, from your investors, from society, what people are expecting because you've been all over the press or whatever, and like, holy shit, this is already a success. And you're like, well, it's not yet a success. And everybody's, no, what are you talking about? Because many people are not entrepreneurs. They cannot understand what's going behind the scenes. And you also have to fake it till you make it. So it puts you in a very tight spot. But life moves on and investors just move on. And in our case, it was fantastic, the support that we had from the board, from the investors, from the vast majority of investors. I spoke to practically everybody, either in person or by phone. We had like investors at that point from like 12 different countries. And many of them understood it. Some didn't. The problem with Latin America is some people, they cannot differentiate between being an investor, which is a person who passively put money in your company and has no decision in what you're executing. That's why there's a board, and that's why there's an advisory board, and that's why there's the founding team. In Latin America, there's a very blurry line between I'm a partner in that business, soy un socio, and I'm a passive investor. And so that's one thing that has to be very clearly defined, or just be transparent about that. And people move on. I mean, if vast majority of investors that you have many scars in order to get to where they are, in order to being able to write a $50, $100, or $500,000 check. They have had many slaps in the face, many difficult situations. They've probably bankrupted many companies before, and they understand. So you can lay off some of the pressure by understanding that many of these people do understand, and people forget and things move on, and actually you learn from those experiences. And we had many of our investors say, look, as soon as you get back on the horse, please let me know. I want to be the first person to invest in your next idea. So don't be afraid of just understanding how far you can push, and we just got, in our case, we got ourselves in very, very deep water, and it was we got ourselves into a position where if we wouldn't have gotten this transaction done, even if it was for the liabilities and the operation, we would have been fucked. So we're very, very fortunate. As you say, we landed on our feet somehow and then landed good jobs. Martin is actually going to be the sort of head of innovation and e-commerce for a big retail group now, not in Ecuador, outside. And I was very, very fortunate that Rappi actually embraces these experiences and just finds entrepreneurs who can, you can drop them in the desert and they'll find a way of making it. So life moves on. It's not that bad as it seems.
Yeah, and I want to commend you and your co-founder for how you guys handled it. I mean, you were always very direct with us, and I think, like we said at the time, this is normal on an investor side, where we're expecting 7 out of 10 to have issues and many of them to fail. And the way that you guys handled it, being very direct and winding it down and making sure that the employees got to where they needed to be and getting it done was the right way. And we also agreed,
Thank you. Very, very, it was a very good experience having you guys on board, and much appreciated. I mean, your comments and also, the way it's just very different talking to an investor like you. Luckily, in our case, we had the vast majority of investors who were very understanding. Some weren't, especially when we sent out that letter saying, hey, you have to put money or you're going to be very heavily diluted. They're like, what the fuck is this? A couple of them called me like to literally tell me, what the fuck is this? Who do you think you are? You cannot force me to invest. I was like, we're really not forcing you, but you cannot free ride this. Many people are going to put money. Most people are going to put money, and you cannot be a benefactor of if this turns into a successful exit. So you can't have it both ways. And it was very hard. It was a very hard, very difficult conversations with many of them, but the vast majority put the money, and 85% or a bit over 85% signed off on the deal. So I guess it was good. And I have contact with most of my investors. Many of them were close friends of mine and still are. And I guess what you're saying is the most important factor into landing on your feet and moving forward and having a chance of starting another company. I obviously have some intention of starting, not right now. I still have a very big hangover, but I guess after Rappi, my plan is working in Rappi 4, 5, 6 years, helping the company get to an IPO, obviously banking on that, and then moving on to things. And I strongly believe that the vast majority of our investors will be supportive and will be there again, because, as you say, it's the way you handle things. It's the way you talk to investors and how you're extremely an open book, and you have to be transparent. And it's a delicate line between transparent and being able to manage a successful M&A process, right? Because you can't go out there and be like, we are fucked, we have no money, and either we sell the company or we're bankrupt. So that has to be managed very carefully with your tight group of investors, with your board and with your advisors. But it's not something you can go out and publicly say. So, but just being transparent and open book about things is the only way that you can have any expectation of either landing on your feet or eventually starting another company and having backing from people who already lost money with you.
Thanks for sharing your story here. It's been really, really good. And I know for sure that there's going to be multiple founders that this will impact positively listening to your story, because there just aren't many people who have been willing to share these stories, and it's what we need in the region. And I know it's not an easy thing to do, and really thanks for doing it, and sending you a hug through the internet here to thanks again. And like I said, you really handled it well, and we're very happy to have invested in you, and even if it didn't turn out the right way monetarily. And we'll be here waiting for whenever you do your next thing, or
fantastic,
sending us new startups to look at or whatever. So thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Nate. It's been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking with you. Happy to be on your show again, and hopefully we can keep doing things together in the future. You guys are very active in Ecuador, and that makes me very proud. And I'm sure that hopefully some other companies will see the light at a region level.
Yeah, it's going to be great to continue working together.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders with our guest Alejandro Freund. And thank you to Angel and Raka for producing this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend and give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's the best way to share what's going on in Latin America's ecosystem.